My daughter-in-law said, "Cancel your doctor's appointment and take me to my game tomorrow." When I said no, her hand came flying across my face so fast, it stung through my bones. "You old thing," she spat. "My future matters more than your useless checkups." And my son just stood there, silent. Before I continue, please like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. I'm Eleanor James, 67 years old. Mother of one, widow, and the woman who raised a boy that forgot where he came from. You know, when you spend 43 years of your life pouring everything you have into one child, you think that love creates some kind of permanent bond. You think that all those nights you worked double shifts at the diner while he slept, all those times you chose his school supplies over your own groceries, all those dreams you tucked away in dusty corners so his could flourish. You think that means something. You think it builds a foundation that can't be shaken. I was wrong. My husband died when Michael was just 16. Heart attack at 52, left me with a mortgage, a teenage son, and hands that shook every time I looked at the bills. But I didn't let Michael see me cry. No, I saved my tears for the shower, for the drive to work, for those quiet moments after he fell asleep when I'd sit at the kitchen table and wonder how I was going to make it through another day. I worked 3 jobs. 3. The diner from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, cleaning houses until 6, and stocking shelves at the grocery store until midnight. My feet swelled so badly I had to soak them in ice water every night. My back ached like someone was driving knives between my vertebrae. But Michael never went without. Never. He had his sports equipment, his prom tuxedo, his college fund that I built quarter by quarter, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. When he graduated valedictorian, I thought I'd done something right. When he got that scholarship to state, I thought maybe all those years of exhaustion had been worth it. When he called me from his dorm room, homesick and grateful, telling me I was the strongest woman he knew, I thought we had something unbreakable. I should have known better. When he married Claire, I thought he'd found gold. I didn't know it was gold-plated. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. 28 years old with honey blonde hair that always fell just right, and this smile that made you want to trust her immediately. She worked in marketing at some downtown firm, wore clothes that cost more than I made in a month, and spoke with this confident voice that made everything she said sound important. The first time Michael brought her home, she complimented my pot roast and asked about my garden. She called me Mom by the end of dinner and hugged me goodbye like she meant it. I remember standing in my kitchen after they left, washing dishes with tears of joy running down my cheeks because I thought, finally, my boy would have someone to love him the way he deserved. What I didn't see was how she watched me that night. How her eyes cataloged every worn piece of furniture, every outdated appliance, every small sign that I wasn't keeping up with the world she wanted to live in. I didn't notice how she whispered to Michael in the car afterward, or how his calls became less frequent after they started dating seriously. The changes started small. So small you might think I was being paranoid if I told you about them individually. Like how she'd gently suggest that maybe I shouldn't call during dinner time because it interrupted their couple time. How she'd laugh and say things like, "Oh, your mom is so cute with her old-fashioned ideas," when I'd offer advice about relationships or cooking or anything, really. How she started answering Michael's phone when I called, saying he was busy, but she'd be sure to pass along the message. After they got married and moved into the house I'd helped Michael buy with the money from selling my husband's tools and my mother's jewelry, the changes accelerated. Claire had opinions about everything. The guest room where I stayed when I visited needed to be updated for their lifestyle. The family photos I'd given them to display made the living room look cluttered. Even the Christmas ornaments I'd made when Michael was little were too childish for their sophisticated holiday aesthetic. But it was the way she talked to me that cut the deepest. This condescending sweetness, like I was a confused child who needed constant correction. "Oh, Eleanor, honey," She'd say when I'd suggest we use real butter instead of margarine, "We're trying to eat healthier now." You understand. Or when I'd offer to help with dinner, "That's so sweet of you to offer, but I think Michael prefers my cooking style now. It's more modern." Michael started changing too. My son, who used to call me 3 times a week, started calling 3 times a month. When he did call, Claire was always in the background, and I could hear her commentary on everything I said. If I mentioned my arthritis was acting up, she'd make some comment about how I complained too much. If I shared good news about a neighbor or a small victory in my life, she'd redirect the conversation back to their achievements, their plans, their perfect life that somehow never seemed to have room for me. The day they removed my photos from their house was the day I should have known what was coming. I'd given them a beautiful collage of Michael growing up, his first day of school, his graduation, our family vacations to the lake when his father was still alive. Pictures that captured 25 years of love and memories. When I came for Thanksgiving, they were gone. "We're going for a more minimalist aesthetic," Claire explained when I asked. Those old photos were just making the space feel busy. We kept the important ones in our bedroom, of course. But I knew she was lying. I saw the way she said old photos like they were garage sale finds instead of irreplaceable memories. That's when she started calling me the antique with opinions. She thought it was clever, the way she'd smile when she said it, like it was an affectionate nickname instead of a knife twisted slowly between my ribs. She'd use it when I'd suggest they visit more often, when I'd ask if they wanted to keep any of my mother's china, when I'd mention that I miss spending time with my son. "There goes the antique with opinions again," she'd say, and Michael would actually chuckle. My son would laugh at his mother being reduced to a worn-out object taking up space in their perfect world. The doctor's appointments started becoming an issue about 6 months ago. I'd been having these chest pains, nothing dramatic, just this persistent ache that wouldn't go away. My family doctor, Dr. Martinez, had been running tests for weeks. Blood work, EKGs, stress tests, imaging, trying to figure out what was wrong with my heart. The appointments were always on Tuesdays at 10 in the morning because that's when my Medicare coverage was best and Dr. Martinez had openings. Claire knew about these appointments. I'd mentioned them in passing when Michael asked why I couldn't babysit their neighbors' kids on Tuesday mornings. But suddenly, every Tuesday became urgent for Claire. She needed rides to job interviews, hair appointments, shopping trips that apparently couldn't happen any other day of the week. And she expected me to cancel my medical care to accommodate her schedule. "It's just a checkup, isn't it?" she'd say when I'd protest. "You can reschedule those anytime." But this opportunity one have is a one-time thing. She made it sound so reasonable, so logical. Like my health was flexible, but her convenience was carved in stone. Michael would nod along, completely oblivious to what she was really saying. Or maybe not oblivious. Maybe he understood exactly what she was saying and just didn't care anymore. That's the thought that kept me awake at night, wondering when my son stopped caring whether his mother lived or died. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Dr. Martinez had called on a Friday afternoon. I remember exactly where I was standing when my phone rang, in my little kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that would last me 3 days, looking out at the garden where my tomatoes were finally ripening despite the late season. "Mrs. James," Dr. Martinez said, and his tone was different. More serious. "I need you to come in on Tuesday. We got your test results back, and there are some things we need to discuss right away." He wouldn't tell me more over the phone, but the gravity in his voice made my hands start shaking. After months of tests, after weeks of wondering, we finally had answers. And I needed to hear them. I called Michael immediately. "Honey," I said when he answered, "I know you and Claire are busy, but I got a call from Dr. Martinez. He wants to see me Tuesday morning about my test results, and he sounded concerned. I'm probably worrying over nothing, but would you mind driving me? I don't think I should drive myself if I get bad news." There was a pause. I could hear Claire in the background asking who was calling. Then Michael's voice, distant, like he'd pulled the phone away from his mouth. It's Mom. She wants a ride to another doctor's appointment. Another one? Claire's voice was sharp, annoyed. Doesn't she go to the doctor every week? What's wrong with her now? Mom, Michael said, coming back to the phone, couldn't you take a cab? Claire has something important on Tuesday, and I promised I'd drive her. Something important. My potentially life-threatening test results were less important than whatever Claire had planned. But I swallowed my hurt and said I'd figure something else out. I always figured something else out. But Monday evening, everything changed. Claire called me directly, which she almost never did unless she needed something. Eleanor, she said, and her voice had that false sweetness that meant trouble. I need you to cancel your appointment tomorrow and drive me instead. I'm sorry, I said, but I can't cancel this appointment. My doctor has test results that he needs to discuss with me in person. It sounded urgent. Urgent? She laughed, this dismissive little sound that made my chest tighten with anger. You're 67 years old. Everything feels urgent when you're that age. But this is actually urgent. I have a championship game tomorrow at 10, and Michael's car won't start. I need your car. My car? I was confused. Claire, I need my car to get to my doctor's appointment. And it's a championship game, not a medical emergency. Surely you can find another way to get there. You don't understand, she said, and now the false sweetness was gone, replaced by that sharp edge I'd been hearing more and more lately. This game determines whether I make the league playoffs. My whole season comes down to tomorrow. Your little checkup can happen any day, but this opportunity will never come again. Claire, this isn't a little checkup. My doctor has been running tests on my heart for months, and he finally has results. He sounded worried when he called. I can't just reschedule this. Yes, you can, she said, and her voice was getting louder. You can and you will. I'm 28 years old with my whole life ahead of me. You're an old woman with nothing but doctor's appointments and complaints. My future matters. Your future is almost over anyway. I hung up on her. I actually hung up on her, something I'd never done to anyone in my entire life. My hands were shaking with fury and hurt, and I sat in my kitchen chair trying to process what she'd just said to me. Your future is almost over anyway. Like I was already dead, just taking up space until someone official made it legal. I should have known she wouldn't let it end there. Tuesday morning came, and I was getting ready for my appointment when I heard the front door of their house slam so hard it rattled my windows next door. I live in the little cottage behind their main house, the one that used to be my guest house when Michael was growing up, the one I moved into when they needed me to help with the mortgage on their dream home. I was buttoning my good blouse, the navy blue one I wore to important occasions, when my door flew open without even a knock. Claire stood there in her tennis outfit, her face flushed with anger, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. I said cancel your appointment, she snapped. Michael's car is definitely not starting, and I need yours. Now. Claire, I said as calmly as I could manage, I told you yesterday that I cannot cancel this appointment. It's important. It's about my health, possibly my life. You'll have to find another way to get to your game. Another way? She stepped into my living room without being invited, her tennis shoes squeaking on my clean floor. There is no other way. Uber costs $40 each way. Taxis take forever to come to this neighborhood. My teammate who usually gives me rides is already at the courts setting up. You are my only option, and you're being selfish. Selfish. The word came out sharper than I intended. I'm being selfish by prioritizing my health over your tennis game? Your health. She laughed, this ugly sound that made my skin crawl. Eleanor, you're fine. You've been fine for months. You just like the attention of going to the doctor all the time. It gives you something to talk about, something to make people feel sorry for you. But I have real problems, real goals, real things happening in my life. This appointment could determine whether I live another year, I said, and my voice was starting to shake with the effort of staying calm. My doctor has never called me with that tone before. Never insisted I come in immediately. This isn't about attention or sympathy. This is about my life. Your life? Claire's voice rose to almost a shout. What life? You sit in this little house all day doing nothing. You have no job, no hobbies, no friends except the other old people at the senior center who are just as boring as you are. You contribute nothing to this family except guilt and obligation. But I'm building something. I'm somebody. I matter. That's when something inside me broke. Not the angry kind of breaking that makes you scream and throw things. The quiet kind of breaking that happens when someone shows you exactly how little they think of you, exactly how disposable you are in their world. No, I said simply. I'm not canceling my appointment, and I'm not lending you my car. Find another way to get to your game. That's when her hand came flying across my face so fast, it stung through my bones. The slap was sharp and precise, designed to shock rather than seriously injure, but the sound echoed through my small living room like a gunshot. My cheek burned, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. But what hurt more than the physical pain was the look in her eyes, this cold satisfaction, like she'd been waiting months to do that. You old thing, she spat, and there was pure venom in her voice now. My future matters more than your useless checkups. You should be grateful that someone as young and accomplished as me even acknowledges your existence. But instead, you're selfish and stubborn and completely useless. I stood there with my hand pressed to my cheek, staring at this woman who had just struck me in my own home, and I couldn't form words. In 67 years of life, no one had ever hit me. Not my parents, not my late husband during our worst arguments, not strangers on the street. No one. That's when I heard footsteps on my porch and Michael walked in. My son, my boy, the child I had sacrificed everything for, walked into my living room and saw his wife standing over his mother with her hand still raised, saw the red mark on my face, saw me trembling with shock and pain. And I waited for him to explode. I waited for him to demand an explanation, to comfort me, to tell his wife that she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Instead, he just stood there, silent. Michael, I whispered, she hit me. He looked at Claire, then at me, then back at Claire. His face was blank, like he was calculating something in his head. Like he was weighing options and deciding which choice would cause him the least inconvenience. Mom, he said finally, and his voice was tired, impatient. Just give her the car keys. It's one appointment. You can reschedule. She hit me, I said again, louder this time, because surely he hadn't understood. Your wife struck me in my own home. You were being difficult, Claire said before Michael could respond. I asked nicely, and you refused to help family. Sometimes people need a wake-up call. And my son, my precious son who I had raised to be kind and decent and strong, just nodded. His wife's future matters, yours never did, he muttered under his breath, quiet enough that he probably thought I wouldn't hear. But I heard every word. I stood there in my living room, my cheek still burning from the slap, looking at these two people who were supposed to be my family, and I understood something that should have been obvious months ago. I wasn't their family. I was their burden. I was the obligation they resented, the inconvenience they tolerated, the old woman taking up space in their perfect world. Claire was holding out her hand, expecting me to give her my car keys so she could drive to her tennis game while I canceled the medical appointment that might save my life. And Michael was standing there supporting her, choosing her convenience over my survival, her temporary wants over my permanent needs. I walked to my kitchen table where my purse was sitting, ready for my appointment. I pulled out my car keys and looked at them for a long moment. These keys represented my independence, my ability to take care of myself, my freedom to leave this house when I needed to, and they wanted me to hand them over like I was a child being disciplined. Here, I said, and I set the keys down on my coffee table. Claire stepped forward with this triumphant smile, reaching for them. But I wasn't done talking. Before you take those, I said, and my voice was steady for the first time since she'd walked into my house, I want you both to understand something. You think my future doesn't matter because I'm old. You think my health doesn't matter because you assume I'm going to die soon anyway. You think my feelings don't matter because I'm supposed to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention you throw my way. Michael shifted uncomfortably, but Claire just rolled her eyes. But here's what you don't understand, I continued. When I raised Michael, when I worked 3 jobs to keep him clothed and fed and educated, when I gave up my own dreams so he could pursue his, I wasn't doing it because I expected to be repaid. I was doing it because I loved him. Because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice for our children not because we want to control them later, but because we want them to become good people. I looked directly at my son. I failed. I raised a man who stands by while his wife hits his mother. I raised a man who thinks his elderly parents' health is less important than his wife's recreational activities. I raised a man who forgot that love isn't supposed to have conditions. Mom, Michael started, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. Claire, you think you won something today. You think you proved that you're more important than me, that your needs matter more than mine. But what you actually did was show me exactly who you are. You're someone who hits elderly women when you don't get your way. You're someone who thinks youth and beauty and athletic ability make you more valuable than someone who's lived 7 decades and learned what really matters. You're someone who will teach my son that love is about power instead of kindness. Claire's smile had faded, replaced by something harder and uglier. And Michael, I said, turning back to my son, you think you're choosing your wife over your mother, and maybe that seems right to you. Maybe you think that's what being a good husband means. But what you're really choosing is cruelty over kindness. You're choosing someone who hits elderly women over someone who would die for you. You're choosing someone who sees your mother as competition over someone who sees your happiness as her greatest achievement. I picked up my purse and headed toward the door. Where are you going? Claire demanded. I need the car. Call a cab, I said without looking back. Call Uber. Walk. I don't care. But you're not taking my car, and I'm not missing my appointment. You can't leave, Michael said, and there was panic in his voice now. Mom, we need to talk about this. You're overreacting. I stopped at the door and turned around. No, honey. I'm finally reacting appropriately. When someone hits me in my own home while my son watches silently, there's nothing to discuss. When someone tells me my life doesn't matter while my son agrees, there's nothing to work out. When someone treats me like garbage while my son supports them, there's nothing to fix. I opened the door and stepped onto my porch. Oh, and Michael? Don't call me unless you're ready to apologize for forgetting that I'm your mother, not your enemy. And Claire? Don't call me at all. When I closed that door, I didn't just leave the house, I left behind the version of me that tolerated disrespect, that made excuses for cruelty. That believed I deserved whatever treatment people chose to give me because I was old and inconvenient and supposedly lucky to have any family at all. The click of that door closing was louder in my heart than the slap had been on my face. I drove to my appointment with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear of what Dr. Martinez might tell me, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself. For the first time in months, I felt like Eleanor James instead of the antique with opinions. I felt like a woman with dignity instead of a burden with complaints. Dr. Martinez was waiting for me when I arrived, and the first thing he noticed was the red mark on my cheek. Mrs. James, he said, his voice full of concern, what happened to your face? Family disagreement, I said, which was the understatement of the century. But Sarah, the nurse who had been taking my blood pressure for months, looked more closely. Honey, she said gently, that looks like someone hit you. And something about the kindness in her voice, the genuine concern from someone who barely knew me, broke open the dam I'd built around my emotions. I started crying right there in the waiting room, not the quiet tears I'd been holding back for months, but deep, body-shaking sobs that felt like they were pulling something poisonous out of my chest. "No one that loved you would let that happen," Sarah said, putting her arm around my shoulders. "Family doesn't mean you have to accept abuse." That sentence broke me open even more, because it put words to something I hadn't wanted to admit. What had happened in my living room wasn't just a family disagreement or a moment of stress. It was abuse. I had been abused by my daughter-in-law while my son watched and supported her. At 67 years old, I had become a victim of domestic violence in my own home. Dr. Martinez postponed our appointment discussion until after I'd calmed down and had a chance to process what had happened. But when we finally talked about my test results, he delivered news that made the morning's events seem even more cruel and senseless. "Mrs. James," he said gently, "you have a significant blockage in one of your main arteries. We caught it just in time, but you're going to need surgery within the next 2 weeks. If we'd waited much longer, if you'd missed this appointment or postponed it, you likely would have had a major heart attack within the month." I sat in his office, absorbing the fact that my daughter-in-law had demanded I cancel an appointment that might have saved my life so she could play tennis. That my son had supported her demand, knowing his mother might die without proper medical care. "I want to ask you something," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "The stress you've been under, the environment you're living in, it's not helping your heart condition. Do you have somewhere else you can stay while you recover from surgery?" "Somewhere peaceful." I thought about my little cottage behind Michael and Claire's house, about waking up every day to their arguments, their demands, their resentment. I thought about recovering from heart surgery while Claire complained about inconvenience and Michael chose silence over support. "I'll figure something out," I said. Over the next few days, while I was making arrangements for my surgery and trying to process everything that had happened, I discovered something that made Claire's behavior even more despicable than I'd imagined. I was going through my mail, sorting bills and medical paperwork, when I found a letter from my bank. It was addressed to me, but someone had already opened it. Inside was a statement showing that my savings account, the one I'd built up from selling my mother's jewelry and my late husband's tools, had been accessed by someone with joint account privileges. But I hadn't added anyone to that account. Ever. I called the bank immediately, and what I learned made my chest tighten with more than just arterial blockage. Someone had forged my signature on paperwork giving them access to my accounts. Someone had been slowly draining my savings for months, taking small amounts that I might not notice, building up to larger withdrawals that cleaned out most of my emergency fund. But the worst part was the real estate paperwork I found mixed in with my medical bills. My cottage, the little house I lived in on their property, had been listed for sale without my knowledge. The listing described it as charming mother-in-law quarters, currently vacant, perfect for rental income or guest accommodations. Currently vacant. While I was living in it, Claire hadn't just been treating me like an inconvenience. She'd been actively stealing from me while planning to make me homeless. She'd been forging my signature, accessing my bank accounts, and plotting to sell my home out from under me. And somehow, I doubted Michael was ignorant of any of it. I gathered all the paperwork and drove straight to the police station. The officer who took my report was kind, but not particularly optimistic about prosecution. Financial elder abuse was hard to prove, he explained, especially when it involved family members. But he took photos of my bruised cheek, documented the forged signatures, and promised to investigate. What he couldn't promise was justice. What he couldn't promise was that I'd get my money back or that Claire would face real consequences for what she'd done. But what he could do was create an official record, something that would matter if things escalated further. I spent that week staying in a hotel near the hospital, preparing for my surgery and trying to decide what to do about my living situation. I couldn't go back to the cottage, not knowing what I knew now, not feeling safe in a place where someone could walk into my home and strike me whenever they felt inconvenienced. But I also couldn't afford to stay in a hotel indefinitely, especially with Claire having stolen most of my savings. I was trapped between homelessness and returning to an abusive situation, which felt like the cruelest irony of all. That's when karma decided to make an appearance. I was sitting in my hotel room the night before my surgery when Sarah, the nurse from Dr. Martinez's office, called me. We'd become friendly over the weeks of appointments, and she'd been checking on me since the incident. "Eleanor," she said, and there was excitement in her voice, "you need to turn on Channel 7 News. Right now." I fumbled for the remote and found the local news. The reporter was standing outside what looked like a tennis facility, and the headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Local tennis player arrested for fraud." My heart stopped. Police arrested Claire Jameson today on charges of identity theft and elder financial abuse, the reporter was saying. Jameson, who was competing in the regional tennis championships, was taken into custody after allegedly stealing thousands of dollars from her elderly mother-in-law and attempting to sell property without authorization. The camera showed Claire being led away in handcuffs, her tennis outfit wrinkled, her perfect hair disheveled, her face red with anger and humiliation. The tennis championship she'd been so desperate to attend, the one that was supposedly more important than my life-saving medical appointment, had become the location of her public downfall. But it got worse for them. The news story continued with information I hadn't expected. Apparently, the bank had been investigating unusual activity on several elderly customers' accounts, and my complaint had been the final piece in a pattern they'd been tracking. Claire had been stealing from other elderly clients at her marketing firm, using her professional access to personal information to forge signatures and drain savings accounts. The tennis club where she'd been so desperate to compete also released a statement. She'd been banned from all future competitions due to character issues incompatible with our community values. Her sponsorship deal with a local sports equipment company was terminated immediately. Her membership at the prestigious country club where she'd been networking was revoked. But the most satisfying part of the news report was the statement from Michael's employer. He'd been put on administrative leave pending an investigation into whether he'd been complicit in his wife's crimes. Their joint bank accounts had been frozen as part of the criminal investigation. The house they'd been so proud of, the one I'd helped them buy, was being seized as evidence in a fraud case. By the time I got back from my successful heart surgery 3 days later, they weren't living in a dream home anymore. They were begging for rent money and legal fees. Sarah picked me up from the hospital, and as we drove past their house, I could see the police tape across the front door, the for sale sign that had been there for my cottage now joined by a foreclosure notice on their main house. "Justice has a way of finding people," Sarah said quietly. "It just takes time." The next few weeks were a blur of recovery and legal proceedings. The police investigation had uncovered evidence of systematic fraud that went far beyond what Claire had stolen from me. She'd been running a sophisticated scheme, targeting elderly clients and family members, building trust before exploiting it financially. Michael called me exactly once during this time. Not to apologize, not to check on my recovery, but to ask if I would testify on Claire's behalf. To ask if I would tell the court that she was usually a good person who had just made some mistakes. "She hit me," I reminded him. "She stole from me. She tried to make me homeless. She endangered my life by trying to prevent me from getting medical care." "I know," he said, and his voice sounded hollow. "But she's my wife. And she's pregnant. Pregnant. So now there was going to be a child involved, another generation that would be affected by the choices Michael and Claire had made. Another innocent person who would pay the price for their parents' cruelty and greed. "Michael," I said, and I kept my voice as gentle as I could, "I love you. I will always love you because you're my son. But I can't save Claire from the consequences of her actions, and I won't lie in court to help someone who abused me. She made choices, and now she has to live with them." "So that's it?" he asked. "You're going to let them send her to prison? You're going to destroy our family." "I didn't destroy your family, honey. Claire destroyed it when she decided I was worth less than a tennis game. You destroyed it when you stood by and watched it happen. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen. He hung up on me. My son, my only child, hung up on me because I wouldn't help his criminal wife escape justice. That was 4 months ago. Since then, Claire was sentenced to 2 years in prison for elder fraud and assault. She'll likely serve 18 months if she behaves herself. Michael lost his job due to the scandal and has been working part-time jobs to pay for lawyers and prepare for the baby. He sold their house to pay legal fees and moved into a small apartment across town. The cottage that Claire tried to sell illegally? It's mine again, free and clear, with new locks and a security system. I've been living there peacefully, tending my garden, attending my regular checkups, and slowly rebuilding the savings that Claire stole. Dr. Martinez says my heart is healing beautifully. The surgery was completely successful, and my stress levels have dropped dramatically since I removed toxic people from my daily life. My blood pressure is better than it's been in years. It's amazing how much better your health gets when you're not constantly walking on eggshells around people who think you're worthless. The most surprising thing that's happened is the friendships I've built. Sarah from Dr. Martinez's office has become a close friend, and through her I've met other women my age who've dealt with similar family situations. We have coffee twice a week and laugh about things that used to make us cry. I've joined a gardening club and a book club and discovered that I actually have quite a lot to offer people who appreciate kindness and wisdom over youth and beauty. I've also started volunteering at a local organization that helps elderly people deal with financial abuse from family members. It's more common than you might think, this idea that older people are automatically less valuable, less deserving of respect and protection. I share my story with women who are going through what I went through, and I help them understand that they deserve better. Michael has tried to contact me a few times. He sent a card when the baby was born, a little girl they named Emma. He's asked to visit, to bring Emma to meet her grandmother, to try to work things out now that Claire is in prison and can't influence his decisions. But I'm not ready for that yet. Maybe someday I will be. Maybe when Emma is old enough to understand why her grandmother disappeared from her life for a while, I'll be able to explain that sometimes people who love you have to protect themselves from people who hurt you. Maybe when Michael can acknowledge what he did and why it was wrong, we can rebuild something from the pieces of our broken relationship. But right now, I'm learning something I never understood before. Peace is more valuable than family obligations. Dignity is more important than keeping the peace. Self-respect matters more than avoiding conflict. Now I sit on my porch every morning with my tea and my peace. The garden Claire once criticized as too old-fashioned is blooming with vegetables and flowers that feed both my body and my soul. The cottage she tried to steal is filled with photos and memories and books and all the things that make a house feel like home. I may have been slapped once, but I never let them slap away my dignity again. Every morning when I sit on that porch, I think about the woman I was before that day, the woman who absorbed cruelty and made excuses for it because I thought that's what love required. I think about how many mornings I spent feeling worthless and unwanted and ashamed of taking up space in the world. And then I think about the woman I am now, the woman who understands that love doesn't require you to accept abuse, that family doesn't mean you have to tolerate disrespect, that getting older doesn't mean getting smaller or quieter or less important. I'm 67 years old. I've survived a heart attack scare, major surgery, financial abuse, physical assault, and the loss of my relationship with my only child. But I've also survived to tell this story, to warn other people that age doesn't make you disposable, to remind families that elderly parents are people with feelings and rights and dignity that deserve protection. My future isn't almost over, as Claire so cruelly suggested. It's just beginning. Every day I wake up in my own home, make my own decisions, choose my own priorities, and surround myself with people who value kindness and respect. Every one of those days is a victory over the people who tried to make me disappear. If you've ever been told that your age makes you less valuable, if you've ever been expected to sacrifice your health for someone else's convenience, if you've ever been treated like a burden by people who should treasure you, please know that you deserve better. Please know that it's never too late to demand respect, to protect yourself, to choose peace over chaos. Never let anyone make you choose between your health and their convenience. Never let anyone convince you that your pain matters less than their pleasure. Never let anyone slap away your dignity, no matter how much they think their youth or beauty or potential gives them the right to treat you as less than human. You matter. Your health matters. Your feelings matter. Your future matters. And if the people in your life can't see that, then maybe it's time to find people who can. If you've been through something similar, if this story resonates with your experience, comment below and let me know you understand. Like this video and subscribe so more people can see stories that remind us dignity has no expiration date. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they don't have to accept abuse from anyone, even family. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be treated without love.